we're mainly here to launch Gareth's new book, The Green Executive. And we're absolutely delighted that we've been given the honour and the chance to host this event with Gareth and for Gareth. I know obviously many of you know Gareth very well, but I still want to take this opportunity for those who don't to say a little bit more. Gareth graduated in 1993 from the University of Cambridge with a degree in engineering, Liberal Democrat councillor for Newcastle City Council. As Gareth was pointing out earlier, until the recent changes in power at Newcastle City Council, he was sort of number 2 in charge of all things green at the council, and I'm sure that is it's a great testament that for the past 2 years, Forum for the Future have named Newcastle most sustainable city in the UK, and that must largely be down to the efforts of you and your colleagues there. And it's a great title and something that the city is very proud of. But jobs, all sorts of different roles, including as a research associate at Newcastle University. And therefore, although Gareth is an alumnus of Cambridge University, he's also an alumnus of Newcastle University and has an MPhil from here. Gareth then set up Terra Infirma in 2006, and first book published 2009. Now I'm going to have to, that's the 3 secrets of green success. Green business, sorry. And over his time in other roles, Gareth advised literally hundreds of businesses on improving their environmental performance. So very well equipped to talk to us about subject, well, very well equipped to author that book and to tell us more about the contents of that. But I did say, why are we here? And there is a sort of more deeper question, why are we actually here? Why are we at Newcastle University Business School within Newcastle University? And for those of you who, again, I think many of you will do, but for those of you who don't know, Newcastle's very much set itself apart to be a civic university, to really play a role in the economic, social and cultural development of its region, and to use some of its research power and its other activities to really try and do something about some of the societal challenges we face. And certainly sustainability, which is the second challenge that the university is seeking to address, is definitely a really, really big challenge. But it's one that we are going to bring our research strength behind and really make a tangible difference. And I'm going to ask Paul in just a moment, Paul Younger, who's director of NIRES, the Newcastle Institute for Research on Sustainability, to say a couple of words before we give Gareth a chance to say something. But also just wanted to add on what the business school feels what part it can play. We do have some specific research that is relevant. We have students who are doing all sorts of activities with third sector organisations on projects looking at lean management, doing all sorts of different things that fit with the whole sustainability agenda. But one thing we particularly decided to do to support the launch year, which is this current year of the Sustainability Societal Challenge, was to host this week of events, because we feel that one thing that we can do is very much try to stimulate debate about the role of business in meeting the sustainability challenge that faces us all. So with great deal of support from external organisations, lots of willing speakers, including Gareth. We've got other people coming in later in the week. We've got Procter & Gamble, who have set our MBA students and other MBA students a challenge around consumer behaviour. We've got other lectures going on. We think it's going to be a really exciting week that should stimulate debate. And I've just been so glad that Gareth was prepared to let his book launch be part of that.
Well, thanks. I feel almost like I've been at either my wedding or my funeral there. This is a great long elegy. I have to say, though, that not wanting to disappoint Fiona, but to catch a new species of butterfly in Ecuador, you walk out with a net, trip over something, and you'll land on one. And none of the 4 that were actually named did I actually catch. There were 4 of us on the expedition. I did. There was a 5th butterfly, the one that got away, that was a new species that I found. But believe it or not, because it was a female of the species, ecologists only name for the male. So I'll let you ponder the gender politics of ecology from that. But yes, The Green Executive, my new book. The first question everybody asks me about this book is that you on the cover? Which is rather strange, because I wrote the words. They didn't suddenly say, put on a grass tie and go down. And somebody actually asked me where I got the tie from, and I tried to humour them and said, oh, I bought it in a place called Photoshop. But they eventually, I think they eventually caught on to the fact that there's people paid to do this sort of thing. So why did I write it? Well, it's been mentioned that I wrote this first book, the 3 Secrets of Green Business. Which at that time, when I first went self-employed, I basically poured all my knowledge, all my case studies into. And it got picked up by Earthscan, the publishers of both books, and then this hugely long process starts up. And it's pretty much like a pregnancy, because it takes 9 months to go from the final manuscript to the book actually appearing. So I was very itchy. It was my first book. I was very excited, and I wanted to, I was itching to do more and more and more. And then the second thing that happened was I noticed a change in my clients and what they were asking me to do. And more, instead of saying, right, we want you to go in and talk to people on the shop floor or middle management about embedding sustainability into our business, more and more they were starting to say, actually would like you to talk to our board of directors instead. And this culminated in a project I did for the NHS, or part of the NHS called NHS Blood and Transplant, or the ultimate recycling company, as they like to call themselves. But they wanted me to come in and talk to their board of directors, do a workshop with them. But they had one question for me. They said, where are we? How do you measure how successful we have been? And my first reaction was, I don't know. There's only one NHS Blood and Transplant. There are no other organisations that we know of transporting body parts around the body, around the country. But so you can't really compare like for like and say, oh, your carbon footprint's better or worse than theirs. So it's very hard to make a comparison. So I ended up coming up with this chart, which is fundamentally at the heart of the book, and this is the only sort of technical slide I'm going to put up today. So don't panic. Which was really a spectrum of maturity of where sustainability was in the business. So at this end, it was all about compliance. What's the minimum we can do to keep out of jail? Then some companies pay lip service to sustainability, so they've done a project or two. And every time there's a company report, every time there's a presentation, they roll out the same thing over and over again. But there's no real strategy, and it's really a form of greenwash, because they're presenting themselves as something they're not. In the middle stage, a lot of companies are at what I call bundle of projects, where usually a team of enthusiasts have got together and formed a committee, and they're firing off projects left, right and centre. But the problem, it's very exciting and very creative, but the problem is every time they want to move a project forward, they have to go cap in hand to the management, and there's no buy-in beyond that group of enthusiasts. Then where a lot of companies are where is they've got a management system, like ISO 14001, one of the formal environmental management systems. And here, yes, some resources have been set aside, there's some objectives and targets and projects moving forward, but green still tends to work in a silo, and it still tends to be very much a bolt-on. There's nothing really fundamentally changing in the business. At the very end is nirvana, where you've got sustainability embedded into the business. And that requires clear commitment to leadership, strategy, long-term goals, everything, whether it's your systems, your product, your supply chain, everything must be aligned to delivering sustainability and total buy-in or near total buy-in from all the staff. So that's the model I developed for NHS Blood and Transplant. But also in my other reading, I realised that a huge number of businesses were here and were realising they needed to move to here, but they felt they didn't have the skills to do so. This is about management, this is about leadership, and that's the fundamental difference. But those leaders, those directors, senior managers and directors of business didn't feel they had the skills, so that was the market I was going for the book. Now I had a problem, because I'd used up all my case studies in the first book, and they tended to be more at an operational, practical, being an engineer, as Paul said, at technical level. So I didn't have any case studies. And I wanted some fresh case studies, because frankly all the generic ones were getting really tired. Everybody was repeating them again and again and again. So I found 18 people, there they all are there, from all sorts of businesses, and decided to go along and interview them, and thankfully they all said yes. Huge number from the UK, as you'd probably expect, even larger proportion from the Northeast, but there are people from the States and in one case Belgium there, but I'll come on to that. That's the list of all these fantastic people, and these interviews started to take on a life of their own, because they all opened up to me. Only in one case did a PR person try and take the text of the agreed interview and turn it into a press release and take all the interesting things out. But we managed to get by that one as well. I won't say who it was. But all the rest, they really opened up, and they were giving a personal story. And as I realized the book was about a personal journey from people who may not have thought of themselves as being experts in sustainability, wanting to take on sustainability issues, then that personal story became very, very important. I have to say, though, there's a bit of a, you know, people talk about Hello magazine, the curse of Hello, that if a celebrity couple shows Hello around their lovely home, they split up within almost weeks of publication. Well, unfortunately, at least 5 of these people have moved on from their posts. One of whom, very unexpectedly, was told not to come in on Monday, which is a great shame, because that person was one of the most interesting and best of the interviewees. But I am a bit worried that there's a curse of the green executive. Added to that, one of the companies ended up being bought out, and the publisher was bought out as well at the final stages. So I had a bit of a wobble where I didn't even know if it was going to come out, because all the staff who I was dealing with took voluntary redundancy. So suddenly I had a whole new load of people just literally 2 months ago. So fingers crossed, it's all set down now, and the curse of the green executive is no more. I could stand here and talk about all the theory and stuff I've put into the book, but I'd much rather tell some of the stories of these 18 people, so I thought that would be far more interesting for you tonight. And the first one is one of my favourite stories. The chap behind the wheel of the van is called Glenn Bennett, and he runs this company, EAE Limited, and they distribute those little leaflets you get in B&Bs and tourist information centres telling you where the bird of prey centre is and all those sorts of things. And before I interviewed Glenn, I didn't actually realise there's a whole industry of getting those out to the B&Bs and tourist information centres. Of course there is, but I didn't realise that it existed and how competitive it was. Now Glenn is very committed to doing everything right, and he decided that he wanted his business to be green. So he installed this wind turbine that you can see there, and you know it's a very small depot, and that dominates it now. But that took him 2 years to get from deciding to go ahead with it to it actually being installed. He had to deal with 22 different agencies to get there. He had to get a local authority planner sacked for illegally trying to obstruct the wind turbine going up. You know, it was just an absolute nightmare. He gets it up. What happens? He immediately gets a letter through the door from the same local authority saying your business rates have gone up because you've improved your site. So he took a deep breath and went into a media campaign to get that taken away as well, because it's absolutely ridiculous that somebody should invest in clean technology like this and then suddenly be penalised for it. So he's nothing if not a survivor. But the big thing for Glenn about it now is, just after the wind turbine went up, he bid for a contract from the Scottish Executive, and the Scottish Executive, like a lot of public sector organisations, now give 10% of tender points to green or environmental performance. So 10% of the overall score they give to each tender to compare to them, they give to environmental performance. Some organisations now 15. This business, it's very hard to distinguish yourself in. You know, you collect leaflets, you sort leaflets, you take them out to the place, you send in an invoice. You know, it's very hard to be a better leaflet distributor than anybody else. So tenders are very, very difficult to actually write. He won this contract, and the feedback was everybody else put in an environmental policy, you put in a picture of a wind turbine. So they were just saying, we will do stuff, we're committed to this, and he was saying, well, look, we've done it. So he'll never make any money back, or a sensible amount of money back, on having installed the wind turbine, but he's actually winning new contracts on the back of it. And I'll come back to that later on, but that's a very important point from a business point of view. And you can see from the other picture, you know, he's going the whole hog now. He's bought electric vehicles for local deliveries around Edinburgh. He's buying biodiesel vehicles for the longer trips around Scotland. And, you know, I could stand here and just list all the things he's doing, but he's a real inspiration. And I'll come back to some of the issues that I've mentioned there when I sum up. Here's a local company, I think, if I get directions right, just across the road here. Muckle, they're a law firm. Julie Power, I think was the first person I interviewed. And Julie's one of these people who's incredibly modest, almost to the point of frustration, because she'd say, oh, we haven't done very much. And then she'd say, oh, we did do this, and we did that, we did this, we did that, we did, and then it all comes out. They've done a humongous amount of stuff for a law firm. You know, they've done things like cut their number of computer servers from 13 down to 3 using a process called virtualization, which is normally the domain of much bigger organizations, but they've done it. But they started from the bottom up. They had a team of lawyers who just wanted to do the right thing, wanted to be green, so they set up a Let's Think Green team, and this is one of the slides they use. And make it fun are probably the 3 most important words on this slide, because they were thinking, how do we engage with busy lawyers on green issues? So they had a fun day, and they set a quiz with questions like, how many sheets of paper do you think our partners use per month each? And people were shocked to find it was 3,000. They've actually cut that down to 1,000 now as a result of this. And that got people, instead of beating people over the head saying, you know, you must go green, you must go green, you must go green, it got people really engaging in it. And now they have got a competition where the 3 floors of their business all compete against each other to see who can have the smallest carbon footprint, who can use least paper and all the rest of it. And because lawyers are very competitive people, they really get into that. And they've got this reputation now, if you ask around, of being sort of an ethical law firm, which is quite an achievement. I've said that while Julie's in the room before, so she doesn't mind me saying it. But yes, people will say, I've been at events where they've been talked about, and people said, it's always Muckle. And again, they're finding that this is, as they're bidding for contracts, particularly from the public sector, more and more people are not just looking for environmental policy, they're saying, what have you actually achieved? So they're winning contracts in the back of this. They also feel they're attracting good, fresh talent, because in a business like this, your future is your next, your next employees. That people are being attracted to the business because of this reputation. I mentioned a Belgian. This is Toon Bassout. He runs a family paint company in Flanders. And the picture on the right I took of some of his 1,477 solar panels on the top of his roof. That's when I finally got there. I got lost quite badly. I ended up in the sort of equivalent of sort of the Belgian equivalent of Westerhope, for those who know Newcastle, out on the edge, and no taxi firms, but they did come and rescue me, which was very nice. And Toon does all these wonderful things as well, but the way they've set up their business is they have a thing called a People and Planet Fund. And every year, a proportion of the profits go into that People and Planet Fund. And then a committee of employees decides what to spend it on. So the first 64 solar panels were paid out of that. And they do all sorts of things like cycle maintenance classes for employees. They even have a woman doing the ironing. So everybody brings in their shirts, leaves them in, goes off to work, has got fresh shirts for the week afterwards. And that percentage increases as the profits go up. So there's a real incentive for the employees to to buy into the process, because the better the business runs, the more benefits they get out on this sort of environmental and social thing. They're going for wind turbines and whatnot as well. The other interesting thing that that they've done is they don't have a green team. They have one person who is a coach or facilitator who helps other people do their job in a greener way, rather than having a team to one side and everybody going, oh, that's an environmental issue, let's throw it over to them. So another small, innovative company that's very, very exciting. Going to the other end of the scale, Marks & Spencer's. This is Richard Gillies, who's in charge of Plan A of Marks & Spencer's, which you may have seen if you're in the store. You'll see these big boards saying most of our fish come from sustainable sources, and at the bottom it will say Plan A, and quite often because there is no Plan B. The story behind Plan A is that Sir Stuart Rose, who was then chair and chief executive of the company, watched An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, and came out and he thought two things. One, he just felt personally that he wanted to do something about this. But secondly, he's very aware that Marks & Spencer's is a trusted brand on the high street. And when they've got into trouble in the past, it's because that trust has failed, when quality has gone down and things like that. So he felt that sustainability and green issues were part of that trusted brand for the 21st century. So he put 120 million quid into Plan A up front, and he wasn't expecting to get any back. Richard was put in charge of it, and they've done gazillion things, absolutely a huge number of things. I'll just give you one example. I went into Marks & Spencer's a couple of years ago and wanted to buy an umbrella, and found that I could get one made out of recycled polyester, which sounds quite simple. But when they decided they wanted to do this, there was no supply chain for recycled polyester of this grade. So to make these would have cost a fortune. So they worked with suppliers. They decided to start stuffing their cushions with low-grade polyester, which started a huge amount of volume of material going through that process. That made the high-grade polyester cheaper, so they could actually make it into umbrellas and school uniforms, and they're trying to extend it to more and more stuff. So even though you might just see the stuff about fish and things like that, there's a huge amount of work going in behind the scenes. But interestingly, they weren't expecting to get any of that £120 million back. They just saw an investment in the brand. And they have made it back, and they've made a profit on it. And Richard's actually a bit coy about how much profit they'd made, because it's all part of this trusted brand thing. They didn't want to be seen to be doing it for mercenary reasons at all. So they're reinvesting that cash back into the next phase of the programme. But yes, I shop at Marks & Spencer's now, actually having been in to see them and talk to them about what they do. Another local business, Vic Morgan, set up Ethical Superstore. Vic's a very interesting character, because the first thing he's a Harvard Business School MBA graduate. He's got all the sort of charisma, enthusiasm and ambition that you would expect of the archetypal Harvard Business School MBA graduate. You sort of think, what are you doing running a business in Gateshead? And the answer was love. He followed somebody across the Atlantic, unsuccessful in love, successful in the business. And he set up, he worked in a number of, I think he worked for Tradecraft and a number of organisations, but he set up Ethical Superstore, which is basically an online business where you can stipulate what your ethical or green criteria are, and then it recommends the products for you. And it's a fantastic business. It has just been bought out by Sparky Tail. That was the one I mentioned before. That's public knowledge. There's no embarrassment about that. But Vix continues to be a director of the Spark organisation. Now, for start, online businesses have about 1/3 of the carbon footprint of a retail shop. So rather than going to a ethical, physical bricks and mortar store, they have a much smaller carbon footprint, because they don't have to light, heat and cool all the space that you need to do in a big store. But Vic came up with a lot of interesting things as well, because when he was at Harvard, they put him through some psychometric test, and it said that two of the things that drove him, the two things that drove him most, one was money and second was philanthropy. So he is a very strange mix of sort of hard-headed businessman and tree hugger at the same time. But what he explained was that the mistake they made at the start was they tended to try and employ people with the values behind Ethical Superstore first and foremost. And that didn't work. So now they go for people with good commercial acumen and teach them the values of the business. And he actually said, if you want to run a green or ethical business, you have to overcompensate on the commercial side. It's not an easy option. So I got some very good advice from Vic as well. Another local one, and Roy's here at the back, the Tanfield Group, which bought out Smith's Electric Vehicles. Smith's has been about since 1929, 1928, and produced its first electric vehicle in the mid-30s. So electric vehicle, we're very excited in the Northeast about the whole electric vehicle thing. They've been out for a very, very long time indeed. And again, I think the original driver was local air quality, because cities like this one were getting very concerned about build-up of particulates and smog in the urban area. So at the time, the big driver of pushing electric vehicles, sorry, I'm not talking about the 1930s now, I'm talking about much later on, was local air quality, but it's been caught up in this whole move towards the environmental and the sort of global environmental issues, and everybody wanting to invest. So as you can see, we've got a range of apprentices here who are fitting this chassis with electric drive chain. And Roy came out with a very similar thing to Vic, is you have to really have your commercial head on here, and you have to have a business plan that stacks up, and don't think anybody's going to give you an easy ride because you're producing an environmental product. Another big company, Procter & Gamble, huge international company. Fortunately, Peter White, who's the head of sustainability across the global company, happens to work in North Tyneside, which makes life very easy. And his is the longest interview in the book, and it had to be cut down substantially. There was so much content there. It was absolutely great. But one thing he was very excited about at the time was Ariel Excel Gel, their new product. And you might go, why? It's just a cleaning product. But they tried to launch a green set of cleaning products in the 90s. I'm using Ecover here as an example, a sort of archetypal green product with lots of trees in the front and all the rest of it. And like most of these, they didn't sell in great numbers because only 5 to 8% of consumers will actually compromise on quality or price to get a green product. So they decided instead they were going to design a mainstream green product from scratch, and this is it. In terms of price and performance, competitively priced, it sounds as if I'm doing an advert here for them, but it was also ranked the best cleaning clothes washing product that Which magazine had ever done. Yet the big thing in the front is it will wash at 15 degrees centigrade, almost cold temperatures. Because they did an analysis of the whole life cycle of clothes washing and found that heating the water in the washing machine was the spike in the process. So they designed this from scratch to allow you to turn your washing machine down. Fortunately, my washing machine 30, it doesn't do 15, it's either cold or 30. And the other thing about washing machine dials, I don't know if you find they magically creep up over time. Never actually watched it move, but it does move. But he was very, very excited about this. And the core message I got from Peter was they took on a strategy of no trade-offs. That they were not interested as a mass-marketed consumer product company. They were not interested in niche products, that if it didn't perform on price, performance and planet, then they were going back to the drawing board. And that's the way they're moving it forward. And that's the only way to sustainability, because we're not going to get to sustainability through trying to persuade people to buy Ecover products. We're going to get there by people not even realizing they're going green. They're just buying green products because that's what's on the shelf. Right, that's the stories I'm going to tell. I'm just going to run quickly through some conclusions that I pulled out of this. Do nothing is not an option. If you try and sit on your hands on this topic at the minute, energy prices are going up, waste prices are going up, water costs are going up, legislation's getting tighter, so which means much higher costs of compliance. All these things are getting much more expensive. And on the other side, with both the public sector and big buyers like Walmart, Tesco's, Marks and Spencer's and all the rest, now pushing sustainability right down through the supply chain. If you're not green, you can't compete. And that goes on to the next bit, which is, for years we've been told, go green, save money. Well, one of the conclusions in the book is go green, save money's for amateurs, because the real benefit is in winning new business or the branding. Because if you take this attitude, if you expect everything to save you money directly, then you mightn't do the things like Glenn Bennett did at EAE and go for the wind turbine, which is bringing him in more business. I mentioned as well, particularly at the start, that we're moving away from words to actions. So having an environmental policy is no longer enough. It's a bare minimum. Saying that you're committed to doing something or you will do something is no longer enough. It's we have done. And more companies are saying, look, this is what we have done. Here's a photograph of it, rather than a environmental policy or mere words. Going back to points like what I was making about consumer goods, everything else is integrate, integrate, integrate. It has to become part of the DNA of the organisation, to use the old cliche. Sustainability can't be a bolt-on. You can't do it like that. You certainly can't compete with sustainability like that. And as I say, with people like Procter & Gamble, Marks and Spencer's, and a lot of these smaller businesses, you see they're seriously changing the way they do business in order to deliver sustainability. To do that, it has to come at a leadership level, because you can't do that bottom up. You can't make those fundamental changes without commitment from the top. It's a tough gig, and one of the things that came across about all the people I interviewed was their enthusiasm for it. They all loved it, both because they were bringing their personal values to work and that side of things, but they loved the challenge and they loved the achievements they were making on it. But it's not easy. You know, the things I've quite glibly talked about people changing their processes, changing their products, changing their supply chain, building new supply chains, changing the culture of their organisation, those are serious business challenges. And what I felt, the feeling I got from these green executives I interviewed was they were up for that challenge and they were really relishing it. And the number one attribute going on from that is perseverance. These guys didn't give up. I talked about Glenn Bennett and his 22 organisations, 2 years, then the other battle. Some other people told me, sometimes off the record, because I couldn't put it in the book, some of the battles they'd had to fight to make these things work. And perseverance and ingenuity, I should probably add in there, because it's not just banging your head against the wall until the wall falls down. It's quite often finding a way, you know, a door somewhere else to get past the wall. So that's all I want to talk about. But before we go on to questions and answers, I'd just like to say some thank yous. First and foremost, thank you to everybody who took part in the interviews, because they became the life and soul of the book. Secondly, I have to thank Ambassador Rita here and her colleague Annalisa Kelso, because they did some fact-checking on some parts of the book, which was they uncovered a couple of schoolboy errors, which I'm very grateful for. And thank you to them. Thank you to Earthscan for continuing to publish me, and for all the hard work they've done. Although most of the people who've done the hard work have moved on to pastures new. And lastly, thank you to the business school for hosting this event. They're making it sound as some sort of privilege having me along. It's a very great privilege to come back to Newcastle University, where I started my environmental career, and speak to you all tonight. So thank you very much.
I think I have to pick this one up. We've got time for some questions and answers if anybody's got anything. Still, Dermot?
Wait for the mic.
Wait for the mic.
I'm going to assume this microphone's working. I was just wondering, looking at some of the examples, how much effort these companies put into pushing the green credentials of their products. You know, you look at the aerial product, it doesn't scream green at you. You have to look quite hard to see the 15. You wouldn't know from a distance that that's a recycled polyester umbrella, but you might know in the shop.
Yeah.
I don't know. So the general question is, how hard do you find these companies really push the green credentials of their product?
It's interesting in consumer goods because the general public is in a bit of a interesting position on green issues. They would all like to do more, but whether or not they will make a difference to their behaviour or their purchasing is a moot point. Some will, some won't, and people do very contradictory things. What we're finding in the consumer goods market is that the big retailers are becoming the gatekeepers. So Procter & Gamble, they'll say obviously they've got their own internal values and everything, but the big driver is coming from the Walmarts and Tesco's and Marks and Spencer's of this world who they want to sell to. Because those stores are starting to say now, if you don't give us green products, we'll go and talk to somebody else. So that's an interesting thing from the retail side. If you're further down the chain, then that trickles down to you, and obviously the public sector is driving it very hard as well. Because the reason why I had the board of NHS Blood and Transplant interested in learning about this is they're expected to cut their carbon footprint by 80% by 2050, and that's a huge challenge, and none of them feel equipped to do it. So again, if you take the NHS, 60% of their carbon footprint's in the supply chain. So even if they turned all their own internal processes carbon neutral or zero carbon, they would still have to cut the carbon footprint of their supply chain by 2/3. So they're having to say to their suppliers, go green, or we find somebody who will.
A question directly to that. Where does the initiative for the change then come from? Where does the process that you just outlined start?
It's interesting because in some examples like Marks and Spencer's and Interface, who I didn't talk about tonight, who are in the book, it very much came from almost an epiphany at the very top. In other organisations, Muckle's a good example, it came from the bottom up, but then there was a meeting of minds because the really top, the managing director realised that this was becoming an issue, and that all these guys who they might have seen as some sort of benign but slightly irritating group running around doing all these green things were actually becoming an opportunity rather than a problem. In the other organisations, in the smaller organisations, it tended to come from the boss. In the larger ones, I think there was just a realisation that the pressures were coming down, either coming down the supply chain or up from the regulators and cost pressures, etc., etc.
But in most of the cases from within the companies, the corporations, not driven by either resource prices or lack of them, or consumer behaviour really shifting and demanding for them to take a stance on the subject.
Well, all the people I interviewed, except perhaps one, came from this, as a personal campaign. But what they found was the organisation was not only letting them do it, but now encouraging them to do it. So it's sort of a mixture between the two. Of course, they'll all tell you that they're conforming with their brand values. But the interesting thing was, it's much more about keeping the client, the customer happy, rather than the cost pressures at the bottom. So the whole range, the first 2 chapters certainly, and certainly the first 4 chapters of the book, are on the business case and how complex it is and the different aspects of it. So it's a little bit hard to put that into a soundbite. But more and more it's becoming about keeping the business going, sort of go green or go bust, rather than go green, save money. If that helps answer your question.
Gareth, thanks again for an excellent presentation as per the first book launch as well. I'm interested, you touched on there about the role of private sector, not-for-profit organisations like local authorities, the universities, NHS, etc., about driving this forward. A lot of the a lot of the sort of feedback we get at the moment is with the economic climate as it is, the public are sort of perhaps not as, generally speaking, as enthusiastic about so-called green issues as they have been. So that driving force perhaps isn't there as it was perhaps even just a few years ago. How important is the role of the sort of public not-for-profit sector in these sort of next few years to sort of using their purchasing power to drive things forward?
Well, that's I think it's critical, and from my own experience and elsewhere, I haven't found anybody loosening up the green criteria. If anything, they're tightening. You know, I said 10% was a typical figure. So if you're supplying to the NHS or Scottish Executive, if you just ignore the green thing completely, it's the equivalent of running a 100-metre sprint but giving everybody 10-metre head start. Yeah. Maybe Usain Bolt could overtake me on that, but proper competition, it's becoming more and more the critical factor. The Royal Mail told me, who are semi-public private, but they've got a lot of big private clients, they've won and lost 7-figure contracts where sustainability was a key issue. It's actually more explicit than that, and then asked me to tone it down, say it was a key issue. Didn't want to say the key issue, but it was pretty much in the top one. That it becomes big business then. In terms of, I think the clear driver at the minute is from the public sector and the retailers. That's the two buyers who are really pushing us down through the supply chain. But it is going down below that because obviously Procter & Gamble don't manufacture every single part of every single product. I think you take a company like Apple, only 3% of its carbon footprint is actually within the organisation. So they came under abuse from Greenpeace a couple of years ago, a wonderful parody of their website, and they suddenly changed. They've done a huge amount of stuff to green Apple products since that because they realised their image was at risk. So that was an aspect where, yes, the consumer mightn't be saying, I'll buy a different iPod or a different MP3 player, not an iPod because of green, but they felt it was damaging their brand to be seen to be ungreen. And the same things happen with this whole Foxconn, the suicides in China. The interesting thing about the statistics of those suicides in China is that yes, a dozen people kill themselves, very sad, but the company employs 1 million people. So the suicide rate inside the company is actually less than the suicide rate in the rest of China. And it's something like 1/4 of the suicide rate of US students. So they're sort of throwing that back in the face and saying, well, if these students are going to be activists about it, they should probably be looking at the working conditions in their own university rather than in a factory. Not to say that everything's rosy and nice in those factories in China. It is a pretty brutal way of treating your workforce that I wouldn't condone, but the statistics have got distorted along the way.
Thank you all. A warm round of applause, definitely.
Well, thank you.